June 15, 1944. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stands in a command post south of Caen, studying reconnaissance photographs spread across a wooden table. His finger traces the Allied beachhead, now 16 kilometers deep in places. 9 days since the invasion, and the line on the map keeps moving inland. He looks up at his chief of staff. "They're not leaving," he says quietly. "This isn't a raid. This is the beginning of the end." The realization doesn't come all at once. On June 6th, when reports first arrive of Allied landings across the Normandy coast, the German High Command operates under assumptions that will prove catastrophically wrong. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, initially believes this might be a diversion. The real invasion, he thinks, will come at Pas de Calais, where the channel is narrowest. Hitler, asleep at the Berghof when the landings begin, has given explicit orders that panzer reserves cannot be committed without his personal approval. His staff, terrified of waking him with uncertain news, waits. Hours pass. The Führer sleeps while Allied troops pour onto French beaches. Rommel isn't even in France. He's driven to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday, convinced bad weather will prevent any invasion attempt. When the call comes through on the morning of June 6th, he's at home in Herrlingen. He immediately orders his car prepared and begins the long drive back, racing through the day and into the evening. He doesn't arrive at his headquarters until nearly midnight. By then, the Allies have established themselves ashore. 5 beaches, thousands of troops. The moment for an immediate, overwhelming counterattack has passed. But even on that first day, some German commanders grasp the magnitude of what's happening. General Erich Marx, commander of LX-64 Corps, whose forces are taking the brunt of the assault, doesn't harbor illusions about diversions or secondary efforts. His troops are fighting for their lives against an invasion force of stunning size. He orders every available unit forward, trying to seal the beaches before the Allies can link their separate landing zones. It's already too late. By nightfall on June 6th, over 150,000 Allied troops are ashore. The Atlantic Wall, the supposedly impregnable coastal defense system, has been breached in a single day. The first week brings a cascade of bad news to German headquarters. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit that manages to counterattack on D-Day itself, reaches the coast between Juno and Sword beaches in the afternoon. For a brief moment, German tanks overlook the sea, threatening to split the British landing zones. Then Allied naval gunfire finds them. Shells the size of automobiles scream in from battleships offshore. The panzers withdraw. They never reach the coast again. Rommel, back at his headquarters, begins issuing orders for a coordinated counterattack to throw the Allies back into the sea. He wants the 12th SS Panzer Division, the Panzer Lehr Division, and the 21st Panzer Division to strike together, driving north to the coast. But the divisions can't concentrate. Allied aircraft dominate the skies so completely that German units can barely move in daylight. Panzer Lehr begins its approach march on the night of June 6th, trying to reach the front under cover of darkness. Even at night, Allied fighters find them. The division commander reports losing 5 tanks and 84 half-tracks before his unit even reaches the battle zone. Trucks burn along Norman roads, fuel dumps explode, ammunition convoys disappear under rocket fire. When the counterattack finally comes on June 9th and 10, it's piecemeal, uncoordinated, exactly what Rommel feared. Individual divisions attack as they arrive, without mutual support, without adequate reconnaissance, without air cover. The 12th SS Panzer Division, composed largely of teenage fanatics from the Hitler Youth, throws itself at Canadian positions near Caen, with suicidal bravery and predictable results. Allied tanks, dug into defensive positions, slaughter the attackers. Allied artillery, directed by spotter aircraft the Germans cannot shoot down, pulverizes assembly areas before attacks even begin. The Hitler Youth Division loses a third of its strength in 3 days of fighting. The ground they take could be measured in meters. At Rundstedt's headquarters, the situation maps tell an undeniable story. Each day, the colored pins marking Allied positions move inland. Each day, the symbols representing German units grow fewer. Casualty reports flow in with numbing regularity. The 7th Army, bearing the weight of the invasion, is bleeding to death. By June 12th, 6 days after the landing, the army has lost over 20,000 men. Replacements trickle forward in the hundreds. The mathematics are simple and terrible. At this rate of attrition, the 7th Army will cease to exist as a fighting force within weeks. Rundstedt, a professional soldier of the old Prussian school, understands what these numbers mean. He's fought on the Eastern Front. He's seen what happens when the material balance shifts decisively against Germany. Now it's happening in the West, and the disparity is even worse. On June 10th, he sends a message to the Armed Forces High Command, the OKW, requesting permission to withdraw from Caen and establish a more defensible line further south. The request is denied. Hitler's orders are explicit. Every meter of ground must be held. Every position must be defended to the last man. Retreat is forbidden. The Panzer Lehr division, considered one of Germany's elite armored formations, demonstrates what Allied material superiority means in practice. On June 10th, the division occupies positions south of Bayeux. The commander, General Fritz Bayerlein, has roughly 200 tanks and assault guns, supported by mechanized infantry. It's a powerful force by German standards in 1944, though nothing like the divisions that swept across France in 1940. On the morning of June 11th, Allied fighter-bombers find the division's positions. For hours, waves of aircraft hammer the German lines. Bayerlein watches his division disintegrate. By evening, he's lost half his armor. 30% of his infantry are casualties. The division hasn't even launched its planned attack. It's been destroyed in position, unable to fight back against an enemy it cannot reach. Bayerlein reports the situation to his superiors in language that leaves no room for misunderstanding. His division, he states, has been bombed to bits. The planned counterattack is impossible. He needs replacements, ammunition, time to reorganize. What he gets are orders to attack anyway. The remnants of Panzer Lehr lurch forward on June 12th. Straight into prepared British positions. Allied tanks, hull down behind earthen berms, pick off the attackers at ranges where German guns can barely penetrate their armor. The attack collapses within hours. Panzer Lehr withdraws, having accomplished nothing except adding to its casualty list. By mid-June, Rommel and Rundstedt are united in their assessment. The battle is being lost. Not might be lost, not could be lost. Is being lost. The Allies are ashore in overwhelming strength, and German forces lack the means to dislodge them. Every attempt to counterattack fails. Every effort to contain the bridgehead proves insufficient. The Allies advance slowly, methodically, grinding forward against desperate German resistance. But they do advance, and German losses are irreplaceable. On June 17th, Hitler makes his only visit to the Western Front since 1940. He summons Rommel and Rundstedt to meet him at Margivaux, near Soissons, at a bunker complex built years earlier for a planned invasion of Britain that never happened. The two field marshals arrive hoping to convince the Führer of the reality they face. They bring maps, casualty reports, assessments of Allied strength. They need Hitler to understand that the battle in Normandy cannot be won under current conditions. They need freedom to conduct a mobile defense, trading space for time, preserving their forces rather than sacrificing them in futile positional warfare. Hitler arrives late, in a bad mood, already convinced his generals are defeatist. The meeting takes place in a concrete bunker, the air stale and oppressive. Rommel and Rundstedt present their case. The Allied material superiority is overwhelming, they explain. German forces are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced. The Luftwaffe has been driven from the skies. The Kriegsmarine cannot interfere with Allied supply lines. Every German movement in daylight draws immediate air attack. The troops are fighting magnificently, but courage cannot overcome such disparity in resources. Hitler listens with growing impatience. When Rommel finishes his presentation, the Führer launches into a monologue about wonder weapons that will change everything. The V-1 flying bombs have just begun hitting London. Soon there will be V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, new U-boats. The Allies will be forced to divert resources to defend their cities. The situation will stabilize. Victory is still possible if his commanders would just show the necessary will. Rommel tries again. He speaks bluntly, more bluntly than is wise. The material situation is decisive, he insists. The wonder weapons won't arrive in time or in sufficient numbers. The front in Normandy is crumbling. Something must be done. His voice carries an edge of desperation. Hitler's face hardens. The Führer begins to question Rommel's loyalty, his commitment, his understanding of National Socialist willpower. The meeting deteriorates into argument. Then an air raid siren sounds. Allied aircraft have been spotted approaching. Hitler, who hasn't experienced an air raid in years, is visibly shaken. The meeting breaks up in confusion. Hitler departs immediately, returning to Germany. He will never visit the Western Front again. Rommel and Rundstedt drive back to their headquarters, having achieved nothing. The orders remain unchanged. Hold every position, no retreats, counterattack with forces that don't exist. The numbers tell the story that Hitler refuses to hear. By the end of June, the German 7th Army has lost approximately 47,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. It has received about 10,000 replacements. The mathematics of destruction are inexorable. Entire divisions exist in name only, their strength reduced to a few thousand exhausted survivors. The 352nd Infantry Division, which fought so effectively on Omaha Beach on D-Day, has been ground down to less than 20% of its original strength. The 709th and 204th Infantry Divisions have effectively ceased to exist. The Panzer Divisions, Germany's elite mobile striking force, fare little better. By July 1st, the Germans have approximately 160 operational tanks in all of Normandy. The Allies have over 2,000. The disparity in other equipment is equally stark. The Germans can muster about 300 aircraft for operations over Normandy. The Allies have more than 9,000. German artillery, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, is outgunned and outranged by Allied batteries that seem to have unlimited ammunition. German soldiers report that Allied artillery fire is so intense, so continuous, that movement above ground in daylight becomes nearly suicidal. General Friedrich Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army, watches his command disintegrate. He's a competent officer, not brilliant but experienced, trying to hold together a front that's collapsing under impossible pressure. His troops are fighting with desperate courage, but courage isn't enough. On June 26th, American forces capture Cherbourg, the major port at the tip of the Cotentin Peninsula. Hitler had ordered the garrison to fight to the last man, to hold the port, for weeks to deny it to the Allies, even in defeat, by thoroughly demolishing all facilities. The garrison commander, General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, is captured on June 26th. The port falls the next day. The demolitions are extensive, but the Allies have Cherbourg. The Germans have another defeat. On June 28th, 2 days after Cherbourg's fall, Dollmann is found dead at his headquarters. The official cause is listed as a heart attack. He's 53 years old. Some historians will later suggest suicide, though this is never confirmed. What is certain is that the stress of commanding a dying army, of watching his soldiers sacrificed in a hopeless battle, of receiving impossible orders from superiors who refuse to acknowledge reality, has killed him one way or another. He's replaced by SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser, who inherits a command that's already lost. On July 1st, Rundstedt has a telephone conversation with Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the OKW. The conversation is documented in multiple sources, though the exact wording varies in different accounts. Keitel, calling from Hitler's headquarters, demands to know what should be done about the situation in Normandy. Rundstedt, exhausted and frustrated after weeks of having his assessments ignored and his requests denied, responds with brutal honesty. "Make peace, you fools," he says. "What else can you do?" The line goes silent. Then Keitel, his voice cold, asks if Rundstedt wishes to be relieved of command. Rundstedt, who served Germany for 40 years, who's commanded armies across Poland, France and Russia, responds that he serves at the Führer's pleasure. The call ends. The next day, July 2nd, Rundstedt is officially relieved and replaced by Field Marshal Günther von Kluge. The official reason given is Rundstedt's health. The real reason is that he's told the truth, and the truth is no longer acceptable at Hitler's headquarters. Kluge arrives in France believing that Rundstedt and Rommel have been too pessimistic, that the situation can be stabilized with proper leadership and aggressive tactics. He's a competent commander, proven on the Eastern Front, and he's determined to show what can be done with the forces available. He spends his first days visiting the front, talking to division commanders, studying the terrain and the tactical situation. Within a week, his optimism evaporates. He reaches exactly the same conclusions as his predecessors. The battle is being lost. The material disparity is decisive. The front cannot hold much longer. On July 15th, Rommel sends a formal report to Hitler. It's a remarkable document, a field marshal essentially telling his supreme commander that the war is lost and political action must be taken. Rommel describes the situation in Normandy with clinical precision. German forces are fighting with exceptional bravery, he writes, but the material superiority of the Allies is overwhelming. Losses cannot be replaced. Supplies cannot reach. The front, inadequate quantities. The Luftwaffe has been driven from the skies. Allied naval gunfire dominates the coastal sectors. The situation is hopeless. Then Rommel goes further. He states that the front will be broken through in the near future, probably within 2 to 3 weeks. When that happens, German forces will lack the mobility and strength to establish a new defensive line. The consequences, he writes, will be incalculable for the Reich. He's telling Hitler, as clearly as military protocol allows, that Germany needs to seek a political solution before complete military collapse makes any negotiated settlement impossible. The report reaches Hitler's headquarters on July 16th. There's no immediate response. On July 17th, Rommel is returning from a visit to the front when Allied fighter bombers strafe his staff car on a Norman road. The car crashes. Rommel suffers a fractured skull and severe injuries. He's evacuated to a hospital in Germany, removed from the battle he'd predicted would be lost. He never receives a response to his July 15th report. 3 months later, implicated in the July 20th assassination attempt against Hitler, he'll be forced to commit suicide. On July 20th, a bomb explodes in a conference room at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. The assassination attempt, carried out by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, fails. Hitler survives with minor injuries. The conspiracy involves numerous military officers, many of them serving on the Western Front. The failed plot has immediate consequences for the Normandy battle. Hitler's paranoia toward his generals, already substantial, becomes pathological. He trusts them even less. Their assessments are dismissed as defeatism or worse, as treason. Any suggestion of retreat or withdrawal becomes suspect. The front must hold because Hitler orders it to hold, and questioning Hitler's orders is now potentially fatal. On July 25th, the Americans launch Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy. It begins with a carpet bombing by over 1,500 heavy bombers, dropping more than 3,000 tons of explosives on a narrow sector of the German front. The bombardment is so intense that some German soldiers are found dead without visible wounds, killed by concussion alone. The German defensive line, held by exhausted remnants of several divisions, simply ceases to exist. American armor pours through the gap. The German response is chaos. Units try to establish new defensive positions, but Allied aircraft destroy them before they can dig in. Reserves rushed forward to seal the breach are caught on the roads and annihilated from the air. The front doesn't bend. It breaks. Within days, American columns are racing into Brittany and turning east toward the Seine. The battle of containment, the desperate effort to hold the Allies in Normandy, is over. Now it becomes a battle of survival, a race to escape encirclement. Kluge, trying to manage the disintegration of his command, reports to Hitler that the situation is critical. The Führer's response is to order a counterattack. Operation Lüttich, launched on August 7th, is supposed to cut through the American breakthrough and restore the front. It's a fantasy. The Germans scrape together 4 panzer divisions, perhaps 180 tanks, for the attack. They're opposed by overwhelming Allied ground forces and total Allied air superiority. The attack begins before dawn, achieving some initial surprise. By midday, Allied fighter-bombers have found the German columns. The counterattack collapses in fire and smoke. German losses are severe. The gap in the front grows wider. Now the trap begins to close. American forces are sweeping east and north. British and Canadian forces are pushing south from Caen. The German armies in Normandy are being compressed into a pocket around the town of Falaise. Hitler's orders remain unchanged. No retreat. Hold positions. Counterattack. But there are no positions left to hold, and no forces left to counterattack with. The pocket shrinks day by day as Allied forces close from 3 sides. Kluge, in the pocket with his armies, tries to organize a breakout. Communications break down. Allied artillery fire is so intense that headquarters units cannot function. On August 15th, Kluge loses contact with his superiors for an entire day while trying to reach forward units. Hitler, paranoid after the July 20th plot, suspects Kluge of trying to negotiate a surrender with the Allies. On August 17th, Kluge is relieved of command and ordered back to Germany. He never arrives. On August 19th, somewhere in France, he takes poison. His suicide note to Hitler speaks of fighting an impossible battle against overwhelming odds. The Falaise Pocket is closed on August 21st. Approximately 50,000 German soldiers are captured. Perhaps 10,000 have been killed in the pocket itself. German equipment losses are catastrophic. Over 500 tanks and assault guns are destroyed or abandoned. Hundreds of artillery pieces. Thousands of vehicles. The German armies that invaded Normandy to throw the Allies back into the sea have been destroyed as effective fighting forces. Some German units escape the encirclement, racing east toward the Seine. Their remnants, fragments of divisions, soldiers without heavy weapons or vehicles, exhausted men trying to reach Germany before the Allies overtake them. The Seine River, which might have been a defensive line if German forces had been allowed to withdraw to it in July, offers no obstacle now. The Allies cross it easily. By the end of August, Paris is liberated. By mid-September, Allied forces are approaching the German border. The realization that D-Day was only the beginning comes in stages to the German High Command, but the fundamental truth is visible within days of the landing. Rommel sees it by mid-June. Rundstedt sees it and is relieved for saying so. Kluge sees it within a week of taking command. Even Hitler, in his most lucid moments, must understand it, though he cannot admit it. The Allies are ashore with overwhelming force, and they're not leaving. The Atlantic Wall has failed. The panzer reserves have been destroyed piecemeal. The Luftwaffe has been swept from the skies. The material superiority of the Allies is so vast that German courage, German tactical skill, German operational experience cannot overcome it. In the years after the war, surviving German commanders will write their memoirs, trying to explain the defeat. They'll blame Hitler's interference, his refusal to allow retreats, his insistence on holding untenable positions. They'll point to Allied material superiority, the overwhelming numbers of tanks and aircraft and artillery shells. They'll describe the courage of German soldiers fighting against impossible odds. All of this is true. But the fundamental truth is simpler and was visible to clear-eyed observers by mid-June 1944. The Allies landed in France with the industrial output of America, Britain, and Canada behind them. They landed with control of the sea and control of the air. They landed with a logistical system that could sustain massive armies indefinitely. Germany, fighting on multiple fronts, bled white by 3 years of war in Russia, facing strategic bombing of its cities and industries, simply lacked the resources to throw them back. The question was never whether the Allies would break out of Normandy. The question was only when and at what cost. The German commanders in Normandy understood this. Their reports to Hitler, increasingly desperate as June turned to July and July to August, spelled it out clearly, but Hitler could not accept defeat, could not permit withdrawal, could not acknowledge that the war was lost. So German soldiers died in futile counterattacks. German tanks burned under Allied airstrikes. German divisions were encircled and destroyed, and the commanders who told the truth were relieved or killed themselves or were forced to commit suicide. By September 1944, the German armies that had defended Normandy had ceased to exist. Over 200,000 German soldiers were casualties. 400,000 more were prisoners. Thousands of tanks, thousands of guns, tens of thousands of vehicles were destroyed or captured. The road to Germany lay open. The war would continue for 8 more months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. It had been decided in the hedgerows and villages of Normandy, where German soldiers fought with desperate courage against an enemy they could not defeat, following orders from commanders who could not admit what every man in the front lines already knew. D-Day was not just a landing. It was the beginning of the end. The German High Command realized it long before Hitler would permit anyone to say so aloud.